The Weight of Footsteps. A journey through war, displacement, and human resilience. Do you feel it, too? Do you feel it, too? The weight of footsteps heavy with fear, as families flee with only memories on their backs, no home, no soil, no past to anchor them? Do you see the children lost in the wind, clutching fragments of what was, wondering if the world was always this cruel? Do you feel the crackle of flames in a distant land, a city collapsing like a dying star? Can you hear the whispers of those who stayed, who couldn't run, couldn't hide, their bones rooted in a ground that now swallows them whole? What would you do if war walked into your town, if your sky bled the colors of ruin, if your hands, too, knew the ash of everything you loved? Would you flee, as they did, through forests that do not speak your name, over seas that drown all hope, past borders that forget your face? Or would you stay, in the broken shell of your yesterday, and pray that the earth forgives your stillness? What does it feel like to lose all that you are, not just the walls, the roof, the bed you called your own, but the quiet dignity of being home? Can you imagine the breathless night, when even the stars refuse to guide your way, when even the moon looks away from your grief? Tell me, do you sympathize? Or do you turn your gaze, and let their pain slip through the cracks of your comfort, unseen, untouched, forgotten, as if the war could never come to you? Part 1. The Dawn of Displacement. Chapter 1. The first footstep. The sun sat low over the village of Al-Wasr, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The day had been like any other, children laughing by the stream, elders trading quiet stories beneath the shade of an old olive tree, and the scent of bread wafting from the stone ovens. There had been peace here for as long as anyone could remember. But that was before the first footstep. Amira stood at the door of her small home, watching her husband, Tariq, as he patched the roof. He hummed a melody, the same song he had sung since they were children, and it made her smile. For a moment, life felt untouched, as if the outside world could not reach them. But then the sound came, a distant rumble, so faint it was almost unnoticeable, like the growl of a sleeping giant stirring in its lair. It grew louder. The air thickened with an unfamiliar tension, one that Amira had never felt before, but instinctively recognized. Fear, not fully formed, began to stir in her chest. Tariq stopped humming, his hands stilling. He, too, heard it now, the unmistakable thunder of approaching trucks. He met Amira's eyes, and in that glance, something passed between them, something unspeakable, ancient, as though both of them knew that life would never be the same again. That was the first footstep. Farah, just 8 years old, lay in the tall grass by the edge of the village, hiding from her brother in a game they played often. The sky above her was endless, so blue it hurt to look at. Her mind wandered as she waited, her thoughts as light as the clouds drifting lazily overhead. She had never known war. She had only heard stories, whispers from older boys who had left the village and returned with strange, haunted eyes. Suddenly, the ground beneath her seemed to tremble. Farah sat up, confusion knitting her brow. In the distance, she saw dust rising on the horizon, carried by a wind that wasn't natural. The rumbling grew louder, and she recognized the shapes emerging through the dust, trucks, dark and menacing, moving faster than anything she had seen before. The game forgotten, she scrambled to her feet and ran, her heart pounding as loudly as the engines now filling the air. She had no words for what she was feeling, only the urge to reach her mother's arms, to be safe, to hide. But there would be no hiding from this. Across the village, Hanan sat on a low stool outside her shop, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. At 74, she had lived through much, droughts, famines, and the death of her husband, all of which had etched lines deep into her face. But there had always been peace here, a peace she believed nothing could shatter. She looked up at the sky, squinting against the glare, and muttered a prayer. The sound of engines drew her attention, and she turned toward the road just as the first military truck rolled into view, its tires spitting dust into the air. Soldiers, grim and silent, sat in the back, their eyes fixed straight ahead. She knew in that moment, before a single word was spoken, that the village was no longer theirs. The trucks didn't stop. They rumbled through the village like a wave, and in their wake, they left something far worse than fear, uncertainty. What happens next? What do you do when the land you've always known turns foreign beneath your feet? Night fell swiftly, and with it came the soldiers. They were not the men of honor Hanan had remembered from her youth, those who patrolled the borders to protect. These men were different. They carried the coldness of war in their eyes, and their boots struck the earth with the weight of inevitability. They had come to claim, to take, and to silence. Amira watched from the shadows as the soldiers tore through the village. Her hands shook, gripping the small bundle she had prepared, clothes, bread, and a few coins wrapped in an old scarf. She glanced at her children, their wide eyes reflecting the torchlight outside, their young faces frozen in confusion. She had no answers for them, only silence. Tariq crouched beside her, his face pale but determined. He whispered something, a plan to run toward the mountains, to escape under the cover of darkness. But Amira wasn't listening. All she could hear was the distant echo of the soldiers' footsteps, heavy and unrelenting, like a storm that would not pass. Farah trembled in her mother's arms. "Mama, why are they here?" Amira opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. How could she explain to a child what she barely understood herself? That safety was an illusion, that home was no longer theirs, and that tomorrow no longer held the promise of the familiar? The footsteps grew louder, closer. Fear wrapped itself around them like a tightening noose. In that moment, Amira realized that this was the weight of war, not the bombs or the bullets, but the crushing silence that followed, the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. As they prepared to flee, the question hung in the air: where does one run when the world itself has shifted beneath your feet? Do you feel it, too? The weight of that first footstep? The moment when the ordinary becomes the unthinkable, when the sound of laughter is replaced by the echoes of boots on a distant road. What would you do if the trucks came for you, if the peace you once held so dearly slipped away like sand through your fingers? Would you stay, or would you run, as they did, into the uncertain night, with only the memories of home to guide you? Chapter 2. Cradle of Flames. It had always been quiet here. The village of Al-Khaf, nestled in the embrace of rolling hills and surrounded by olive groves, had stood for generations. The walls of the houses, made of sun-baked clay, held the whispers of those who had lived, loved, and lost before them. Each home, a sanctuary. Each door, a threshold between the chaos of the outside world and the intimate peace within. Until the day the fire came. Fatima stood in the doorway of her home, the evening light casting an orange glow over the village. Her hands were calloused from years of weaving, but tonight, they were still. She could hear the distant crackle of the hearth inside, the comforting sound of wood burning, the smell of bread baking in the oven. But there was another scent in the air, one that clawed at her senses, sharp and acrid. The wind carried it from the east, from the places where war had already swept through like a storm, leaving only ruins in its wake. At first, it had seemed far away, like a distant thunderstorm. But now, as the smell of smoke grew stronger, Fatima knew there was no shelter from this storm. In another home, just a few streets away, Omar played with his youngest daughter, Yasmin. Her laughter was light, unburdened, the sound of innocence untouched by the world's cruelty. Omar watched her with a smile, but his eyes betrayed him. They kept flicking toward the window, toward the faint glow rising over the hills. It wasn't the glow of the setting sun, it was something else, something unnatural. "Baba," Yasmin said, tugging at his sleeve, "tell me a story." He hesitated, the words of the old stories feeling like strangers on his tongue. What could he tell her now? How could he speak of heroes and happy endings when he didn't know if such things existed anymore? Instead, he picked her up and held her close, feeling her small heartbeat against his chest. "Soon, my love, I'll tell you a story soon." But there would be no stories tonight. The flames came with the wind. Fatima saw it first, a distant flicker of orange, dancing on the horizon, hungry and relentless. It spread quickly, devouring the dry fields, jumping from tree to tree. And then it leapt to the first house. The walls that had stood for generations crumbled as the fire tore through them, turning what was once a home into a blackened skeleton. The air was thick with heat, and Fatima's lungs burned as she called for her children. "Amina," Yusuf. Her voice was drowned out by the roar of the flames, now engulfing the village. The fire moved with purpose, as if it were alive, seeking out the homes one by one. It had no mercy, no hesitation. The cradle of their lives, the homes where memories had been born, where laughter had echoed and tears had been shed, were now cradles of destruction. The walls, once protectors, became cages, holding the fire within them until nothing remained. Omar's house was next. He had barely a moment to react before the flames burst through the windows, shattering the glass with a deafening crash. Yasmin screamed as the heat pressed against them, suffocating and absolute. Omar grabbed her, wrapping his body around hers as he ran toward the door. But the fire was faster. The beams above them groaned and cracked, sending embers raining down like falling stars. Yasmin clung to him, her tiny hands gripping his shirt, her face buried in his chest. He could feel her fear, her confusion. She didn't understand. How could she? "Hold on, Yasmin," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Just hold on." He kicked the door open, the cool night air hitting them like a wave of salvation. But as they stumbled outside, he saw it, his neighbors' homes, one after another, engulfed in flames. The village that had stood for so long, the place where generations had lived and died, was disappearing before his eyes. The fire was erasing everything. Fatima stood in the center of the street, her children clinging to her sides. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, as she watched the flames rise higher, their roar drowning out the world around her. The air was thick with ash, and the heat pressed down on her like an invisible hand, pushing her to the ground. She thought of the memories held within these walls, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments of peace. They were all gone now, consumed by the flames. Her home, her sanctuary, was no longer a refuge. It had become a cradle of destruction, a place where the past was reduced to ash. There was a strange beauty in the fire, she realized, as she watched the flames dance against the night sky. It was a terrible beauty, one that destroyed with such grace that it was almost mesmerizing. But it was also final. The fire did not care for memories or love or life. It only cared for fuel, for destruction. And what of those who watched from a distance? Those who saw the village burn, who smelled the smoke but did nothing. Could they feel the heat of the flames from their homes, or were they too far away to care? Do you feel it, too? The destruction that comes when war ignites, when the very place that was meant to protect you turns against you. What would you do if your home, your cradle, became the very thing that sought to consume you? Would you run, as they did, into the night, or would you stand and watch as everything you knew turned to ash? And if the fire came to your doorstep, would you feel the weight of those who lost everything, or would you turn away, untouched by the flames? The cradle is no longer a place of safety. It is a place where hope burns, and memories turn to smoke. Do you feel it? Chapter 3. The shattered sky. The sky had always been a promise. To the people of Darya, it was a constant, the blue expanse that held the sun in its arc, that bathed the streets in light during the day and cradled the stars at night. It watched over them through seasons of sowing and reaping, through celebrations and mourning. But today, that sky was gone. A thick, oppressive cloud loomed over the city, not the gray of rain or the black of night, but a sickly, burning red. It swallowed the horizon, stretching from one end of the world to the other, suffocating everything beneath it. The air, once filled with the hum of life, was thick with smoke and the distant, steady drumbeat of destruction. Maryam looked up at the sky from the rubble of what had once been her home. She could barely recognize it now. Her fingers trembled as they traced the jagged edge of a broken wall, the same wall where once her children's drawings had hung. Now, all that was left were fragments, shattered glass, crumbled stone, and the constant ash that rained down, covering everything in a fine gray dust. "Mama, where are we going?" Her youngest, Salah, tugged at her sleeve, his eyes wide with fear. She knelt beside him, brushing the ash from his hair, but she had no answers. The places they could go had vanished in the same moment that the sky had been swallowed by smoke. She tried to find the words, the lies that mothers tell to protect their children from the terror of truth. But even as she opened her mouth, the roar of a distant explosion echoed through the streets. The ground beneath them shook, a shuddering reminder that the world was crumbling around them, piece by piece. "We'll find somewhere safe," she whispered, even as she cast her eyes to the sky, searching for something, anything, that could offer hope. Across the city, Rami stood on the rooftop of his building, his eyes locked on the horizon. He had always loved the view from up here. The city, sprawling and alive, had once seemed endless, a tapestry of colors, sounds, and movement. But now, all he could see was the destruction spreading like wildfire. His heart was heavy with the weight of it all, with the helplessness of standing still while the world collapsed around him. The sky, once so familiar, now seemed like a stranger. It was as if it had turned its back on them, allowing the flames below to rise higher, unchecked. He could hear the voices of his neighbors in the building below, whispers of fear and confusion, but he remained where he was, rooted to the spot. He had to look. He had to bear witness. The first building had fallen days ago, a crumbling tower of smoke and debris. Since then, the city had been unraveling, block by block. He had watched as people ran, fleeing from the destruction, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. But where could they go? The roads were choked with rubble, and the outskirts of the city were no safer than the heart of it. He lifted his gaze once more to the sky, to the place where the sun should have been. It was gone now, lost behind the wall of smoke that hung over them all like a dark prophecy. Is this what it means to lose hope? He wondered. To look up at the sky and no longer believe that it can hold you? In the outskirts, under the same shattered sky, Amal ran through the broken streets with her baby sister, Noor, clutched in her arms. Her breaths came in sharp gasps, and her legs burned with the effort of pushing forward, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. The city was a labyrinth of ruin now, each corner a new nightmare, burnt-out cars, collapsed buildings, the wail of sirens blending with the cries of those trapped beneath the wreckage. She stumbled over debris, nearly falling, but caught herself just in time, cradling Noor closer to her chest. She had to get them out. Somewhere, anywhere, away from the collapsing city. But the streets had become impossible to navigate. Every alley led to another blockade, every road to another dead end. The sky above offered no guidance, no stars to follow. It was as if the world itself had closed in, trapping them in this endless nightmare. Noor stirred in her arms, whimpering softly, and Amal's heart clenched. She had promised their mother she would keep Noor safe, that she would protect her no matter what. But how could she protect her sister when the world itself was burning? Amal slowed her pace, her eyes scanning the wreckage for any sign of safety. But there was none. There was only the endless smoke, the ash that filled the air, and the oppressive weight of the sky pressing down on them. What do you do when even the sky betrays you? She wondered, blinking against the tears that threatened to fall. The city burned on. Each breath drawn was a reminder of what had been lost, each heartbeat a painful echo of the life that once thrived here. And above it all, the sky remained shattered, a reflection of the broken lives below. Do you feel it, too? The way the sky no longer protects, no longer offers its quiet, constant watch over those it once sheltered? What would you do if the sky above your home darkened, not with rain but with the smoke of destruction? Could you still find hope when the heavens themselves have turned away? The people of Darya know this sky. They know its weight, the way it presses down on their hearts, on their souls, until it feels as though they might be crushed beneath it. They know what it is to look up and see only the end, to search for stars in a sky that has forgotten how to shine. And still, they run. They search for safety, for something beyond the ash and flame. But where do you go when even the sky has forsaken you? The answer is simple: you keep moving. Because even when the sky is shattered, the ground beneath your feet remains. And as long as there is earth to walk on, there is hope. Isn't there?